Hello, this is Jeff Cook, Taylor County Extension, and this is Backyard Basics. This month on Backyard Basics, I had a lot of calls this year, last year, every year about ants, whether it's fire ants, harvester ants, Argentine ants, or the ever so famous black pyramid ants that we have here in Taylor County and in the middle Georgia, Sandy area. That I got Dan Suter, who's an extension entomologist based in Griffin. I got him to come down. He's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the ant problems we have in our area. Some ways to control it, and some things that you might actually do wrong when trying to control ants, because you know, when we talk about spraying or putting out ant baits, it's not as easy as just going and throwing something out in the yard or spraying something around the perimeter. So he's going to kind of touch on the basics about ants, biology a little bit, and then hit the high points about how to control ants and what we can do to not really coexist with ants, but really just get them out of our yard. All right, Dan, so we're standing over a pile of bait here. Tell folks about this ant. It's one that you talked about having, you know, kind of in the middle Georgia area or the sandier areas. So tell people a little bit about this one, because I get a lot of calls about this one, and we have a lot of problems trying to control it. Yeah, it's called a black pyramid ant, and this thing has shown up from Central Florida all the way up to Savannah. And it seems we find this ant mainly in more sandy areas, and after it rains, during a rainy period, it's not so bad, but after we get a few days, high temperatures and the sand dries out, the ants become worse and worse. And a lot of times they're just kind of mingling around on the ground. We don't know what they're doing. Right. So what we've done here is put out some Amdro bait, a typical fire ant bait that you might get at Home Depot or Lowe's. Right. And they seem to be taking it pretty well. But y'all have had problems with them trying to take this and other baits in other areas, right? We have. We were in Savannah earlier this year and tried giving the same ant species this same bait, and they were a bit more finicky about it. They just wouldn't take that bait. So they seem to be taking it here pretty well today. Baiting is really the preferred method for ant control, especially on a large scale like this, right. As opposed to broadcasting a liquid type of insecticide. Mainly because the liquid breaks down fairly quickly. So you get some immediate relief with a liquid, but baiting is really more long-term. The ants take that bait back to the queen, they share it with their nest mates, and you get a slow decline of the colony. So really the best way to control ants is really with baits. All right, I'm just talking about baits and talking about sprays, because everybody it seems like they always want to spray. So why don't you explain to the folks, explain to them, because baiting is not, like I said, it's not, you can't just go out there and just throw bait out everywhere. And like we talked about earlier before we even started filming, sure, these ants, earlier when you were down in Effingham, you sprinkled it around, and they didn't seem to care about it. Now here we've kind of piled it up, and they're kind of jumping all over it. So talk a little bit about the ins and outs and the do's and don'ts of baiting, so that folks know that you just can't just go and buy a bag of bait, sure, and throw it out. Yeah, and throw it out there. One of the things we always look at is temperature of the soil, and when the soil gets really hot, the ants just aren't out, and we're talking about fire ants now, and this ant probably as well. Right. When the soil temperature gets really warm, the ants just they're not out foraging for food. So one of the things we do, especially for fire ants, is we'll take a potato chip out, put the potato chip on the ground and wait about 15 minutes, and if fire ants find that, then we know that fire ants are out feeding at that point. It's a good time to put the bait out. So typically in the summertime, you'll wait till later in the afternoon when the sun's gone down, it's a little bit cooler, right, and you're assured that the ants are out feeding. So you want them feeding, you want them actually out there foraging for food before you put the bait out there, or you'll waste the bait. So this doesn't seem to be a problem here. These ants, there's so many of them out here, right, they're just hammering this bait. So, but with fire ants, they're a little bit more finicky. So you say that put it out in the afternoon, so you wouldn't put it out first thing in the morning? Why wouldn't you put it out in the morning? Yeah, the problem with the morning in the summertime is if you get dew on the ground, you put the bait out, it'll ruin the bait, and the ants won't pick it up. So it's an issue of waiting till the afternoon is really the best time. And it doesn't get dark till 9 o'clock in the summertime, so you can do it when you come home from work. So most of your baits, then, you'd say they need to be out, they need to be dry. I mean, ant's not going to pick up a wet bait, it needs to pick up a dry bait. That's right. You'll ruin the bait, and they're not, a bag of Amdro is maybe 20 bucks or so. So you want to watch you don't want to ruin that bait. No, so. That's true. Are there any baits, talking about baits, are there any baits that you say would work better than others? I mean, I know a lot of times like white grub, we say, anything for white grub is going to kill a white grub. Yeah. But are there any baits that you would say, might have a little bit of an edge, or might even be a little easier for somebody at the home to use? Yeah, it really depends on the ant species that you're dealing with. So in an open area like this, you would want to use a granular bait with ants over a large area. You want to use a granular bait. If you have ants in a kitchen, the Argentine ant, the sugar ant we call in Georgia,
Taro bait is a really good bait to use, and anything with fipronil in it. There's a Combat Ant Killing Gel, has fipronil in it. Very good bait for baiting Argentine ants in the kitchen.
So the kind you find in the big old
It's in a little syringe, yeah,
okay.
and they love that stuff. So put it on a little milk carton cap, something of that sort, to keep it from soaking into the substrate, and put it in there. If it dries out, put a little dab of water on it, or rehydrate, and the ants will come right back and drink it. That's a really good bait. But the active ingredient is fipronil, F-I-P-R-O-N-I-L.
So that's what you need for most
It's really
ants.
good. They're really good bait, yeah.
Okay.
And taro is boric acid. That's a pretty good bait. Just boric acid bait is it's a liquid, and just do the same thing. Get yourself a little piece of paper towel or something, put it on a milk carton cap, squeeze some of the taro, the liquid, into a little cap, so you've got a little reservoir there of liquid, and put that wherever you see the ants, and they'll drink it.
All right. We had a good question brought up by our cameraman Elijah Matherly about the the safety factor in some of these baits and sprays. So I was going to ask Dan, how safe are these baits that we put out, the gel bait you talked about, or the granulars you're spreading out in your yard, because everybody's got kids or dogs or grandkids.
Yeah. The thing about the baits that you're putting out in the lawn or in the yard, if the fire ants or any of the other ants are foraging, they're actively foraging, that bait's picked up in 2 hours. So keep things off the lawn for a couple hours, everything's fine. If you put something in your kitchen, the amount of bait that you're putting out and the concentration of the bait is so low, you want to keep those out of the reach of any small child, any pet, anything of that sort. But once the ants are finished drinking, you can just pick it up and throw it away. Everything, that'll be fine.
What about if you do like a concentrated, or you mix up your own spray in the yard? Say you're spraying a perimeter spray around your yard, how long would you keep animals or kids off that?
Yeah, the general recommendation is until it's dry. And so if you add a couple hours to that, it's going to dry immediately. The amount of material that's put out on a liquid is maybe a couple gallons per 1,000 square feet.
Right.
And when you put it out in a yard, it's dry. By the time you get down the street, it's dry. So waiting another couple hours, that you'd be all right.
So most of these products, like I tell people all the time, most of these products are pretty safe. If they weren't, they wouldn't let you put them out around your house.
That's right. That's right. And most of these things are applied, Jeff, at less. They're literally 99.95% water and inert ingredients when you're putting them out. So they're applied at really, really low concentrations of material.
That's good to know. Well, we got down here to the corner of this yard, kind of in an area that doesn't get mowed all the time, and we found your good typical fire ant bait. So I was going to ask Dan to talk to you guys a little bit about fire ants, and maybe even talk a little bit about why maybe I haven't had many calls about fire ants in the last, say, 5 years, and so maybe there's some reason why, but either way, just some things to know about fire ants and fire ant control.
Yeah. So it does seem that the fire ant problems we don't seem to see the fire ants the way we used to. When I was growing up as a kid in Florida, they were everywhere.
Do you think it's because we've gotten used to them?
We learn not to step in the mounds, don't we? as a 4-year-old. But I will say this, several years ago, and there's some folks at UGA have been working on this for several years. You may have heard of the little decapitating fly that was introduced for fire ant control years ago.
Right.
That thing was introduced so the fire ants from South America.
Right.
It's not native to Georgia. Was imported accidentally into Mobile, Alabama, has spread throughout the entire South. Well, about 20 years ago, some folks went down to Central America and were looking for natural enemies, and they found this little fly that parasitizes the eggs of the head capsule of the fire ants. And so this little fly flies around, and whenever you have a fire ant walking out on the grass, this little fly snoops down and lays an egg right behind the head of the fire ant. The egg hatches, burrows into the head of the fire ant, eats the brain of the fire ant, the head of the fire ant falls off, and up pops this little fly. So it's a little parasite. It's called a decapitating fly. It's a fantastic revenge of the fire ant. So maybe that has had a little bit of impact on fire ant populations. I'm sure that it's called classical biological control. When you go to another area, another country, the country of origin of where your pest is, you look for natural enemies, you bring those in, and you let those go. So it's probably had something to do with the reduction in fire ant problems. But what I'm going to talk about now is baiting. So a common way to relieve some pressure of fire ants in your yard might be to apply a bait. And what we got here is just a simple Amdro bait. I picked this up at Home Depot. It's still the over-the-counter standard for fire ant control. And a couple things about fire ant baits. We talked about this a little bit earlier. You want to do this in the afternoon when the ants are out foraging and it's cooled off. It's it's hot out here right now, but a little bit later in the afternoon, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock would be a good time to bait your fire ants. This mound right here, the ants are deep. When it gets hot like this, those ants will go deep. And so they're just cooling off. They're going deep.
Right.
So the mound of a fire, a little bit of trivia here, the mound of a fire ant is actually a solar collection device. So in really cool mornings, that dome actually collects solar radiation from the sun and helps warm them up. So in cool mornings, you'll find them at the top. When it gets really hot like it is right now, they'll go deep. So that mound right there might be 2 or 3 feet deep. So the ants are not out, they're probably not out foraging now, it's just too hot. But when they are foraging and you want them to collect bait, there's 2 ways to do it. You can get a spreader and you can do a broadcast application over the whole yard. You want to make sure that the little hand spreader that you have, wash it out really well if you've ever put fertilizer or any other pesticide through it. Or you can buy a new one, just they're $5 or so, and just make sure this, because ants are very finicky. If they detect anything on the bait, such as fertilizer, they won't pick it up. The other way to do that is to, what I'm going to do right now, is you just take a couple handfuls of this bait and you spread it around the perimeter of the mound. You never want to disturb the mound. I mean,
so you don't go kick the mound.
All men like to kick the mound. I love to kick the mound, but you don't do that, because what you do is when you kick the mound like that, you get the ants into a tizzy and they're not in a feeding mode at that point. They're in an attack mode.
Right.
And they're trying to rebuild their mound, but you're not going to get them to eat anything.
Gotcha.
So the idea is to get them to eat this bait. So be sure to wear yourself some gloves. Amdro bait, by the way, should be, when you open that bag, if you can, put it in a way place, a cool place, not in a direct sun, in your shed somewhere. Try to seal it up, maybe even put it in another bag to keep it sealed. And use it that season if you can. Use it that season. So what you'd want to do is just get a couple handfuls of this material, and you don't never put it right on top of the mound. So the bait that you want to spread is around the outside of the mound like this. And you want to do that to, that's actually probably enough bait there, but you want to just spread it around the mound like this. And when it, again, you want to do this when the ants are out foraging. Right now they're probably not foraging, so you're not going to get a lot of bait collection here, but maybe later on this afternoon they'll probably collect some of this.
So as long as it stay dry and we don't get another of our afternoon thunderstorms, that bait will still be good, and they come out, they could forage and take that. Yeah. Now is that, I mean, I know you said you could, and we always tell you people you can broadcast is like 1 pound or 2 per acre.
That's right.
That. But if you were going to do a mound treatment type thing, could you just do this if you had big mounds around?
That's right.
Just do this instead of broadcasting on the whole.
Absolutely, and it'll save you some time and some bait to just go out and do individual mound treatments with a couple handfuls of bait around the outside perimeter of the mounds.
So you could just break your pound per or 2 pounds per acre down into 1,000 square feet or so, and something like that.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. It's the thing, we probably did mention this, but most of this bait with the ants are feeding, they'll collect most of this bait in just a couple hours.
Right.
And that.
And you said to seal it up. Is that because that stuff's gonna the product in it's gonna break down, or is it because that product, the bait, is actually gonna collect water and moisture and then it's gonna do with it? Yeah,
this is so this is Amdro, and what you're looking at here is probably corn grit. It's just an inert material.
Right.
The chemical is actually dissolved in soybean oil, and the soybean oil, these granules are actually coated in soybean oil. So the ants really aren't actually eating this granule. What they do is the fire ants will take this back into their nest, and they will actually suck the oil, which has the chemical in it. They'll suck the oil out of this corn grit. They'll suck the soybean out, and when they do that, they're sucking out the poison as well. And then they'll share that with their nestmates, the queen, all their larvae. And you can come out here sometimes and find a pile of dispersed, granules that have had the oil sucked out of them. You can find a pile of them down there right next to the mound. They actually have trash piles. Ants make trash piles outside their nest.
They've taken it in and fed on it and then brought the trash out to get rid of it.
They get rid of it. And so they're not actually eating this granule. And by the way, there's another little trivia here. Ants can, especially fire ants that have been studied like this, they actually can't take solid food into their gut. They have a filter in their gut that actually filters out bacteria-sized particles. So all ants you've ever seen, right, they're carrying the granule. They're not actually consuming it. So what they'll do is they'll take back that granule back into the colony. They'll feed it to a larva. The larva will we'll feed it back to them as a liquid, and then they can swallow the liquid. But by and large part, ants, the worker ants that you see, cannot actually take in solid food.
I guess that keeps them from eating all the food that they're collecting.
That's right. Makes them take it back. They got to take it back, yeah, and feed everybody.
Keeps everybody tied together.
That's right. But one of the things you can do after, maybe 7 days or 10 days after you've baited this colony, then you can kick them out.
Gotcha.
And you can go back.
Nothing will come out.
If nothing comes out, you know you're successful. A lot of times what we'll see is you can put a dust on this mound, and a week or 10 days later, the ants the colony shows up right over here.
Right.
What you've done is you've killed some ants, and you'll see some ants on top, but you haven't gotten the material that's way down deep into the mound.
But that's the kind of killing that makes you feel good, when you see them all on top and they're all curled up.
We call that revenge killing.
I think I did it.
You stung me.
Well, let me ask you this, and we can go over here to a shady spot, but we'll talk about it over there. But just something to think about. What about, there's not a lot you can put in a garden. I think Justice or Extinguish. So when we get over here in the shade, let's talk about what you can do with a garden, or if you can do a perimeter treatment.
We'll do that.
All right, we left the Baking Hot Sun with a question about what to do about fire ants or ants in your garden. So I was going to let Dan kind of answer that, looking at baits and things like that.
Yeah. So we don't have a lot of baits that are actually labeled for use in your garden. So one of the things you can do is on the perimeter of the garden, fire ants will cover a large area. So if you've got a small garden, even up to a couple thousand square feet. One of the things I've recommended before, and this will work around lakes too, areas where you don't want to put an insecticide that'll wind up in the lake, because many of the insecticides, even stuff you can get at Home Depot, if it winds up in water, it'll kill everything, and it'll kill every fish in the lake. So you want to be careful of that. But one of the things you can do is put a handful or two of one of these fire ant baits, the Amdro, for instance, for the over-the-counter stuff. Put it on a coffee lid top, something like that. Put that around, the ants will collect that in just a few hours. You can go pick up what bait's left over and go throw it away. And that works pretty well.
You mentioned that not a lot of things are labeled in gardens. What would you consider in a garden? What if you left a strip down the middle of your garden that wasn't an actual garden? Could you put it there? Is it just that it can't be right around vegetable crops? Is that how they would?
Yeah, I think the issue is the nature of just whether these things are systemic or not. They don't want to get these things in the plants.
Okay.
So I don't think any of these things are systemic. They're just not labeled for these uses.
Gotcha. Okay. Last question about ants, and then we'll be done with this. We mentioned Argentine ants. That's one of the other ones we have. That's one of the ones a lot of people call sugar ants. The real small ones that you'll see marching in lines. We always get them we get them when you leave something out, some food item out in a car or in a house, or a lot of times you get them after some rains and things. So tell folks a little bit about, kind of the size of their colonies and the best ways to control them.
Yeah, so it's a sugar ant. The common name is an Argentina. It's actually from Argentina. Came into New Orleans in a coffee shipment back in the 1890s and has kind of taken over Georgia. It's just everywhere. Right. And it's a sugar ant. You see them trailing up and down trees, and every once in a while they'll show up in your Coke can in your kitchen somewhere, literally overnight.
Right.
And by the thousands. These colonies can be 500,000 ants in size. I have measured trails that were 350 feet long, and I stopped measuring the trail. So they can be coming from way far away. So one of the best things to do is we've got some gel baits down here. These baits work pretty well. This is the one I was talking about earlier. It's called Combat Source Kill. It's a gel bait, kind of in a little syringe. It's got fipronil as the active ingredient. Right. This is called Hot Shot Clear Roach and Ant Bait Gel. It's dinotefuran as the active ingredient. You notice that all the baits I'm going to talk about here have water in them.
Right.
So there's nothing really special about the active ingredients other than the fipronil is probably the best active ingredient here. And then you have Taro Ant Killer. The common denominator here is there's liquid in the bait, and so the ants are really taking in the liquid. So these are all sweet baits. They're sweet gels and sweet liquids that attract the sugar ants, and they really go after that stuff. And so you can put those down on the inside wherever you see the ants, and that'll help get rid of them.
Well, the question I always get, because I tell people about these a lot of times, and they're like, I put it out and I had more ants than I started with.
Yeah.
So I mean, is it usually like the next day you'll have more ants possibly, and then after that you start to?
In the first couple hours you want more ants,
right?
Because that's a sign that they actually like it. So the ants that discover it, what they'll do is they'll lay a pheromone trail back to their colony, telling their nestmates, "I found a good food source. You need to follow me." And so for the first few hours, yeah, you're probably going to see more ants, and then the numbers should die down. This ant will also live on the outside and around your house in the garden.
Right.
And so you may want to do some things on the outside with some of these baits as well. Because all the sugar ant problems that we have inside, they're coming from outside.
Right, they're coming from outside.
Yeah.
And treating for the sugar ants outside with some sort of spray is pretty much futile if they're having if you got a colony that big and they're coming from that far. I mean,
Yeah.
spraying or putting something like that outside is not really going to do much to
Well, there's one particular bait, there's one particular spray, one particular spray called Termidor. It's the leading termite control product. It's really good on Argentine ants on the outside, but it's pricey. I mean, you can get it at a do-it-yourself place, but it's a little bit goes a long way. So you would be able to use this for multiple years, but it's a pint might be $80 or $90. It's pretty pricey stuff, but it's really good.
All right, well, thank you.
Alrighty.
So you're trying out the new Amdro Fire Strike. What do you think? He's got a mouthful of bait. I don't think he wants to talk. Do you prefer the Fire Strike over the Hot Shot or the Combat? All right, and be that way. Source Kill Max. I wonder if that'll get rid of my Aunt Mabel. Man, she's been at the house for 2 months. She can't cook and her feet stink. Well, I'd like to thank Dan Studer for making the ride down here to Butler, and hopefully you guys watching this show have learned a little bit about ants, a little bit about, some better ways to control ants in our area, and can use what you learned to keep ants out of your yard, keep your babies and your pets safe. So I guess that's all for this month, and we'll see you next month on Backyard Basics, where we're filmed here in your backyard.